Today we're going to talk about a very enigmatic case because this man we're going to talk about today was considered a fool. Yes, not very intelligent, someone who could barely write his own name. And this is according to his own family. I'm not the one saying it. His family said he was a fool, that he had dropped out of school and was just getting by in life however he could. We're talking about Ricky McCormick, whose own mother used the R word, which I don't know if I can say, let's censor it, but it starts with Rita and ends with arded. I think that's a word you can't say anymore because it's offensive. And his mother said this in front of the investigators to refer to her son. But in June 1999, his body was found next to some bushes in a remote area of St. Charles County in the state of Missouri. And why did I mention his intelligence? Because incredibly, this case is considered one of the most enigmatic. Because of something that, according to experts, a person with very little intelligence like Ricky couldn't do, which is writing 2 notes with encrypted messages that not even the FBI could crack for more than 27 years. On screen, I'm going to show you these 2 notes that to this day remain unsolved, and later we'll talk about the hypotheses regarding this part of the story. Ricky had been found wearing worn and dirty blue jeans and a white t-shirt that was also quite dirty. Although it had been 3 days since he was last seen at a hospital where he was given medication for some lung problems he had, his family had not reported him missing. The body was in such an advanced state of decomposition that parts of his fingers had come off. He had 2 bullets lodged in his head, and there are reports mentioning that his neck had a deep cut. Although in other, more recent articles this is not mentioned for some reason. I don't know if it was later confirmed over time that it wasn't real. Where was the area where they found him? It was on a piece of land between the states of Mississippi and Missouri. It had been used in the past by criminals to get rid of bodies. They also got rid of evidence and even stolen vehicles at this place. And this was important because as Ricky's life was being analyzed, it was confirmed that this had to have been the work of a criminal who knew that area. For example, in 1995, in an abandoned house in that same place, the body of a woman who worked as a sex worker was discovered. You know what I mean. And 2 years after Ricky's case, 2 women without clothing were found just 250 meters from where Ricky had been found. Ricky McCormick worked and lived 20 miles from the crime scene in the historic center of St. Louis. You know that when we talk about victims, we almost always mention that the victims were good people, that family and friends described them as honest and happy. You know, in most cases we do that, but in this case we have to say that Ricky was a mess. He could even be called a criminal. He had been out of school for years, committed crimes, and although he was never married, he had at least 4 children with different women. He even committed a terrible crime by being with a minor, and because of that he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. But he was released after 13 months because he was granted parole. This guy was a mess from start to finish. In fact, no one spoke well of him, not even his family. I mean, there were family members who loved him, who cared about him, but no one could say good things because of everything he did, because of his crimes, because of his life in general. He was 41 years old, that's right, he lived almost like a vagrant, he had a girlfriend, and apparently he used to sleep at his mother's place all the time. He was very poor, he didn't speak English well, and as we mentioned, he couldn't write. His aunt, named Gloria McCormick, stated that Ricky went to a psychiatrist who said that the victim was, and I'm sorry I have to say this again, but this is what is mentioned in the case. I don't know how else to say it, but the family described him this way, and his aunt stated that the psychiatrist said that the victim was so dumb that it seemed like he had a mental block, that he couldn't even analyze or use common sense. But it did show that he was highly imaginative and that he lived almost in a fantasy world. His family even came to believe that he had schizophrenia. The few years he was in school, the school was called Martin Luther King. That was the name he went by. These years were also quite remarkable because the teachers would constantly call his mother because Ricky would stand in a corner during recess staring into nothing. So the teachers would call and ask his mother if Ricky was okay and if his behavior was normal. The teachers said that he didn't understand the classes and never learned to write. That's how he stopped going to school and never studied anything again. At that time, Ricky started sleeping during the day, and at night he would get up to wander around the city. He used to have occasional jobs as a cleaner and also as a waiter, or whatever else he could do to make a little money without having to think too much. I know I'm repeating it a lot, but that's the case. That's how it is. Still, I think later it will catch your attention. I saw a bird there that almost attacked me. But we also have to say that he never kept a job for very long. His aunt used to call him the vampire because of this lifestyle he had of sleeping all day and waking up at night, and the jobs he took were usually at night. When he was close to 18 years old, Ricky started getting into a darker world. He sold drugs, he also used them, and he got into fights with people on the street. Now, let's talk about his biggest crime that we mentioned a while ago. According to his arrest records, in 1992, specifically in November of that year, Ricky was sent to prison for having been intimately involved with a minor since she was 11 years old. In November 1992, she was 14 years old. The victim's name was protected in these documents, but it is indicated that Ricky used to call her Pretty Baby or Bebe Linda. Something important about this case is that these documents, or rather in these documents, his defense confirmed that apparently Ricky had mental problems. In the same way he was tried and convicted, after being released he started working at a gas station. And this part is important too, because the owner of this gas station was sentenced to life in prison for having killed a neighbor with a knife in May 1994. Then another man named David Radigan had acquired the gas station. And in August 1999, 2 months after Ricky's body was found, this man was being investigated for having tried to kill his own brother, who also worked at this company. Remember, Ricky also worked there. He worked with the first owner and then continued working with this man named David Radigan. With this investigation, it was discovered that the brother was involved in drug trafficking. He also had another brother who had been convicted as a sex offender. In other words, we can say it was quite a problematic family. And in some way, Ricky was involved in this by working with them. That could easily be the reason for his death, maybe as revenge. Many believe that Ricky did whatever they told him to do, because he wasn't very smart, so to speak. And even if he had to transport substances for his boss. With everything I mentioned, we can confirm that Ricky McCormick had a very low IQ, he couldn't speak well, he couldn't write either, and he was easily manipulated. Besides having aggressive tendencies and being a criminal, we can't ignore that this man was not a good person. 2 weeks before his death, the authorities found that Ricky had entered a bus station and bought a one-way ticket to Orlando, but not a return ticket. Yes, in Florida, where Disney Park is and where Universal is, etc. This would have been the last trip he made to the state of Florida, since on at least one other occasion that same year he had gone to this place. He stayed at the Econo Lodge Hotel in the city of Orlando in room 280. There are witnesses who said they saw him meeting with someone, but they were never able to identify this person. There are also phone records from his girlfriend, a girl named Sandra Jones, who was not with him in Orlando and who, apparently, had called several different numbers in Florida. When she was interviewed for the investigation, Ricky was about to return to Missouri. She mentioned that she believed her boyfriend was going to Florida to receive and also deliver illegal substances, which is what we just mentioned, that many people believe that Ricky did what he was told and had a boss involved in drug trafficking, and the one who asked him to do these jobs was his boss, the owner of the gas station. Obviously his boss paid him for these errands, although he used to do this constantly. His girlfriend told the investigators that when Ricky came back from the trip, she noticed he was different. It seemed like he was scared. In those last weeks, Ricky was going to the hospital a lot, asking for medication and also trying to stay there with the nurses and doctors. Also, he started staying with his mother more and even asked friends for a place to stay, something he didn't do before. Normally, like we said, he lived kind of like a vagabond. If he had to sleep on the street, he would. If he found a little place to sleep, he'd stay there. He didn't have a problem with that. After the trip to Orlando, his girlfriend said he no longer wanted to be on the street and was looking for places to stay. Even if it was the hospital, it seemed like he was paranoid and felt like he was in danger. On June 22, 1999 at 3 p.m., Ricky entered the emergency department of Barnes Jewish Hospital because he felt chest pain and couldn't breathe. And this wasn't unusual because Ricky had asthma and smoked at least a pack of cigarettes a day. He also drank about 20 cups of coffee a day. He stayed in the hospital for 2 days until he was discharged on June 24, 1999. The doctor told him to come back in a week for a checkup, but obviously he would not return because he would later be found lifeless. After leaving the hospital, Ricky took a bus and went to his Aunt Gloria's house and stayed with her for about an hour. For Ricky, visiting his aunt was something that made him feel peace and tranquility. So he always went whenever he felt bad or was stressed. In fact, he had formed a really close relationship with her, much closer than with his own mother who lived just around the corner from his aunt's house. Gloria, the aunt, mentioned that every time Ricky went to her house, they would talk for hours and hours, and that he loved sharing what he was doing with his life. He even asked his aunt for advice, but on this last visit, Ricky didn't say much. Since it was getting late, the aunt offered to give him a ride wherever he wanted to go. But Ricky told her no and walked out of the house. The next day, on June 25, 1999, it was recorded that Ricky had visited the emergency department of another hospital called Forest Park, which is located less than 2 miles from the other hospital he had visited a few days earlier. He mentioned that he was having trouble breathing after working in a garden cutting the grass. The doctor assured him that it was because of the asthma he suffered from, but almost an hour later, at 5:50 in the afternoon, he was discharged. Now, his aunt mentioned that she found out Ricky had stayed at the hospital all night, but apparently not as a patient. Simply, when he was discharged, he decided to stay there, which is what we mentioned a little earlier. Maybe he felt safe there, yes. According to what we're seeing in this part of the story, he didn't want to stay on the street. He wanted to be somewhere safe. And for him, being in a hospital that's open 24 hours was a safe place. The aunt even stated that she believed Ricky didn't stay with her that night because he didn't want her to suffer an attack from whoever was supposedly threatening or chasing Ricky. I mean, he was either paranoid or someone really was following him. And today, knowing that his body was found, maybe he wasn't wrong, overreacting or paranoid. Apparently, someone really was following him. His girlfriend always believed that the person who hurt Ricky was, or had to have been, his boss. Because apparently in Orlando, Ricky did something that made his boss angry. And this man, by the way, just to clarify, his name is Bob Hamdallah. Oh, Bob Hamdallah, yes, it seems that he is of Arab origin. On October 23, December 1999, the authorities began investigating a man named Gregory Lamar Knox, who was a major drug dealer in the area and apparently worked as a hitman. In other words, he was hired to eliminate people. A witness had mentioned to the police that, besides Gregory being responsible for several deaths, he had also eliminated a black man who worked at a gas station on Chateau or Chateau Street. Yes, it seems like the street name is in French. Chateau or Chateau. Yes, it seems like the street name is in French. And obviously knowing that Ricky was black and that he worked at a gas station on that street, we assumed they were talking about Ricky McCormick. According to this part of the investigation, Lamar was allegedly hired by Bob the Boss to eliminate Ricky. Unfortunately, this remained just a rumor. They were never able to find any evidence of this, not even when they conducted raids. At the gas station and at properties belonging to Ricky's boss, they couldn't confirm anything. Despite this, Bob Hamdallah, Ricky's boss, and Lamar Knox, the thug, were sentenced to many years in prison for other crimes, but not for the murder of Ricky McCormick. The case went cold, and for years the authorities tried to decipher the 2 notes that Ricky had in his pocket. They believed that these notes contain all the information needed to discover who was the person or people who harmed Ricky. The family confirmed that despite Ricky's limited intelligence, he was always fascinated by encrypted messages and had been doing this since he was a child. How about we talk about the theories now? Many people believe that Ricky was a hidden genius, that he was incredible at math and encrypted codes. In mid-2011, we're talking about 12 years after Ricky's death, the authorities decided to publish these notes in the media to see if the public could solve the message. We have to say that thousands of people worked on these notes without being able to solve the message. And we're talking about university students, professors, scientists, mathematicians, and even ordinary people. Imagine that the FBI, which has the largest number of experts in different fields, couldn't even decipher what Ricky apparently wrote in these notes. This is one of the theories, that Ricky was a genius with a complicated life. There's another theory that says maybe Ricky didn't write these notes, but it must have been someone else. Maybe the boss or someone who was manipulating Ricky. And there's a third theory, which honestly I feel is the most realistic. Ricky was a strange man, uneducated, who lived in a fantasy world. We could even say that he was clinically considered insane or crazy. Sorry, it's wrong to say that he wasn't clinically considered insane or crazy, but rather someone with mental disorders and learning difficulties. And that he would have written meaningless letters in 2 notes, I feel like that's much more coherent than him supposedly being a secret genius. That's what I believe. He couldn't write anything at all. We've said it several times. He could barely write his own name. His brother Charles said that Ricky had been doing this since he was a kid. That he used to write nonsense on pieces of paper, and that they weren't secret codes like other relatives said. He was simply a crazy guy who wrote letters that didn't mean anything. And some relatives, for some reason, who probably knew this, because Charles the brother confirmed it, were saying in the media that it wasn't true. That he was a genius, and that he was a genius in mathematics, and that he always liked codes, but apparently he just wrote nonsense. Now, the strange thing is that the FBI believes he was a genius for some reason, or at least that's what I understood from this investigation. And it's like when we see people doing certain things on the street that don't make sense, right? In Paraguay, for example, there are several homeless people who are known for behaving strangely. I remember there was one who would count non-stop. But maybe he didn't even use real numbers non-stop. It was simply part of his madness. There's also another one who did nothing but run non-stop. He's also known in Paraguay as Forrest Gump, like the character from the movie with the same name. That's why in this case it seems a bit ridiculous to me that so many people were working on trying to decipher these notes. Because it seems like it's never really going to have a solution. And there's something that almost nobody mentions about this case, and that's that Ricky had gone to prison for being with a minor, and his death could easily be related to this as well. A father who wanted revenge. Apparently, he had been threatening him, and that's why Ricky felt paranoid and was looking for a safe place. And I would even dare to say that the authorities really didn't want to solve this case, because maybe they know who killed him. And they focused all the attention on 2 notes. which obviously don't make sense or add up, because they know that maybe this father took justice into his own hands. And since we're talking about a despicable and troublesome man like Ricky, it was better to look away and not search for the culprit. But again, this is simply my own theory, because aside from this, nothing makes sense in this case. What I can say with this is that the crime involving the minor, it was in 1992, and his murder was 7 years later, which makes it very unlikely, but it could be. Despite all this, strangely, Ricky is considered a brilliant mind, on the level of the Zodiac Killer, because of those notes found in his pocket.